So now we will have the third speaker, Marie-Claire Phélippeau. Marie-Claire was professor of English literature in Montpellier, France, and is now the editor of the journal Moréane. In her recent publication, Pour l'amour du ciel, she analyzes the place of Thomas More in the medieval and early modern conceptions of death, sin, and afterlife. As the 500th anniversary of More's Utopia is getting nearer, her present interest is shifting accordingly.
Yes. Thank you.
And this is why she has proposed the topics for the current panels. So she's going to talk to us of the poetics of the watery element in a few utopias.
Thank you. You're being very generous. So yes, utopias are fiction, works of human imagination. And today I like to consider utopias not as intellectual constructions of ideal societies, but as poetic objects. And I found many relationships with what you said before, and this will be repeated perhaps in little bits and in a different language. It all started with reading Lucian. Oh, so here. Stop doing this. Yes, okay. I'm getting it. Let's go. It all started with my reading Lucian recently, Lucian's True History, and the subsequent feeling that here was a totally liberated fancy. Suddenly, the inventions of Rabelais, of Thomas More, and of others appeared as only pale imitations of Lucian's unbridled imagination. This prompted me to research how far the poetic transformation of reality was also present in our better-known 16th century and 17th century utopias. In Lucian, it was especially the treatment of the waters, which struck me as really daring. Rivers turning into milk or into wine, the sea being at times a surface, a vehicle, a trap, a haven, the ocean seen as a friend of the wind or a traitor to the traveler. The intimate imagination of that common element water, once freed from the obligation of realism by the utopian genre, might be of some interest, I thought. Therefore, I propose today to analyze the role played by the watery element in these early modern utopias, or modern fictions, Thomas More's Utopia, François Rabelais' saga of Pantagruel and Gargantua, and Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. In my first part, I will look at the poetic experience of the sea. The 16th century and 17th century utopias I consider here all allude to islands. This is where we are near to each other, that spring from the sea or disappear into the ocean, like Atlantis. The imaginary sea often acts alternately as a smooth conveyor to the dream island, when it is seen as a mere surface, or a plunge into that alien watery world fraught with unexpected obstacles. Let us consider that the wind, the breath of the sea, also a metaphor for imagination, can turn the whole voyage into a life and death experience. In the New Atlantis, the travelers recall their ordeal when suddenly the wind failed them, so that, quote, finding ourselves in the midst of the greatest wilderness of waters in the world, without victual, we gave ourselves for lost men and prepared to death. The duality of the water element, which can cause both life and death, gives it its extraordinary power. In Utopia, this duality is verified. At the beginning of Book 2, and as you said, when Raphaëlis Laudet explains how placid and smooth the waters are in the bay, but how difficult it is for boats to land in Utopia due to the dangerous channels, currents at the entrance, known only to Utopians, to the Utopians. I chose this picture because the crescent is more obvious, although it's not, of course, the original, as you know. Death-threatening waters are recurrent in utopias and provide the necessary dramatic episodes of any travel account. In his first draft of Le Quart Livre, Rabelais realized that he had forgotten to stage a tempest, and in his tale. And so he subsequently added a few chapters, making it very dramatic indeed, and the dreadful storm. So this is, I think it's the picture meant to illustrate. I don't know if it's the original, I'm sorry. The dreadful storm, in which one of his characters concludes that those at sea vivent mourant et meurent vivants. They die alive and live as dead men. Another function of these life and death episodes may be to recall the original tragedy that gave birth to a dreamland. The obvious instance is the New Atlantis. Francis Bacon, mixing the biblical and mythological traditions, explains the sinking of the original Atlantis by a deluge that caused the mythical island to disappear. However, the same water that caused the death of Atlantis will provide the birth of New Atlantis. The duality of the water element, this life and death agent, gives water and the sea a godly status. That the sea is a world of its own, godly enough to create other worlds, is particularly evident in what I would call the Jonah motif, an experience present in many utopias. The Bible in the book of Jonah, Lucian's true story, Rabelais' Pantagruel, and Carlivre all have episodes in which the protagonist is swallowed by some monster and lives inside it. In Pantagruel, the narrator visits the giant's mouth, just like Lucian's traveller visited the inside of the whale. Inside the mouth, life is a simple reduction of life outside, with its corresponding geography, teeth being mountains, as you see here, between which the mouth's inhabitants find their way like through a mountain pass. The whale experience refers the reader to the mother womb. Gilbert Durand understands the whale motif as a mere reduction of the image of the sea, seen as the primeval and supreme swallower, with its fish eating other fish in a successive nesting process. For certain cultures, the sea stands as the archetype of the return to original bliss, the maternal abyss. The most obvious example is again Lucian's true history or true story, where the narrator confesses to having lived inside the whale happily enough for, how many? 9 months. After which he felt time had come for him to leave the whale and be reborn into the sea. An extension of the whale motif can be the island, considered by some analysts as a sort of geographical Jonah. I quote, the island being the mythical image of woman, of the virgin, or of the mother. Further than that, and still connected to the idea of successive nesting, is the image of the boat, often used as the metonymy for the symbol of water itself. In our 16th and century utopias, the most interesting occurrence of a superlative boat is the miraculous apparition of the Ark in the New Atlantis. Going back to the origin of their history, the Ben Salamite recall ancestors having seen a pillar and a cross of light on the sea, and then an ark swimming on the sea, in which the wise men found a book and a letter. And unsurprisingly, this book was the Bible. Here, the remarkable feature is that the ark houses a treasure. Roland Barthes suggests that the poetic quality of the boat is not so much, quote, the symbol of departure, more deeply it is a cipher for enclosure. To like boats, he says, is first and foremost to love a superlative home. More surprisingly, perhaps, is connecting the boat with a symbol of femininity. Gilbert Durand sees a poetic connection between the spindle-shaped boat and the moon's crescent, the moon being inevitably qualified as feminine. Why not see the poetic connection with Thomas More's Utopia? No, yes, so I had two in the same one. Thomas More's Utopia, which the island, which like the spindle-shaped boat, is crescent-shaped like a new moon, writes More. Now, to come back full circle to this idea of the duality of water, it does not seem inappropriate to understand that the utopian island has been shaped as a powerful symbol of life and death, since it is precisely the sailing between the horns of the crescent that may be a fatal experience, due to the dangerous rocks and the powerful currents that we mentioned earlier. In my second part, I will analyze the metamorphosis of water. Besides being the place of unexpected dangers, monsters, tempests, unfriendly islands, and pirates, water as a substance is often shown as unreliable. In Pantagruel, Panurge alludes to the slipperiness of the seawater that is always flowing and always disappearing. Shapeless in itself, and yet taking a myriad of different shapes, water is as elusive as the stuff our dreams are made of. No wonder that the poetic imagination of water in Utopias plays with its unstable, even treacherous quality, and imagines water metamorphosed into alien substances. Of course, it is in the nature of water to freeze, don't we know? And authors like to play with the three states of matter, liquid, solid, and gaseous. After Lucian had imagined a solid frozen sea into which the sailors built a cave and hid, and on whose surface they, quote, slid, gliding on the ice smoothly and easily, just as if they were sailing. Rabelais, in his turn in the Quart Livre, imagines the fascinating episode of the frozen words. When the sea melts after a harsh winter, Panurge wonders at the din he can hear around. The skipper, who's a seasoned traveller, answers him, "Be not afraid, my lord. We are on the confines of the frozen sea, on which, about the beginning of last winter, happened a great and bloody fight. Then the words and cries of men and women, the hacking, slashing, and hewing of battle-axes, the shocking, knocking, and jolting of armours and harnesses, the neighing of horses, and all other martial din and noise froze in the air. And now, the rigour of the winter being over, by the succeeding serenity and warmth of the weather, they melt and are heard again." The alchemy of sound and matter is subsequently carried further when Pantagruel finds whole handfuls of frozen water, of frozen words, which, once warmed in his hands, can be heard again. In Lucian's imagination, water does not freeze. It turns into milk. Thus the good mother sea offers its cheesy substance to the hungry travellers. In Rabelais, such a positive change of substance would generally be into milk, no, wine. Another, more negative transformation of water in Rabelais appears in Pantagruel when drought threatens, I quote, "The earth at that time was so excessively heated that it fell into an enormous sweat. Yea, such a one as made it sweat out the sea, which is therefore salt, because all sweat is salt." Unquote. This recalls the various episodes in Gargantua and Pantagruel, where floods of urine inundate whole regions, creating new rivers and changing the geography of France. In Gargantua, the giant's mare, herself a giant horse, relieves herself, and swells the rivers, drowning the enemy soldiers. The other Rabelaisian substitute for water is wine. For, as you may know, wine, not water, is what quenches thirst. The name Pantagruel itself means thirsty. When in Le Quart Livre the party embarks on board the Talamège in quest for la dive bouteille, the mission is advertised on the ship itself. Quote, "The Talamège, Pantagruel's principal flagship, had in her stern for her ensign a huge large bottle, half of which was silver, the colour of white wine, and the other half being red, the colour of claret." In Rabelais' saga, water is indeed the element to be feared. It is essentially apprehended as the sea, the place of all dangers, to be avoided at all cost. "For thou wert not born to be drowned," says Friar John. Far from the ideal of life-giving water, Rabelais' idea of the aquatic element is negative. often denounced as salty, unhealthy, and making man thirsty for wine. Thomas More would antagonize Rabelais when he refused wine for a glass of clear water. But that was Thomas More. The prize for the prize for superlative water goes to Lucian, who, in his Isle of the Blessed, imagined the inhabitants taking baths of hot dew. Doesn't dew sound as the epitome of the pure and precious water? And now we reach our third point, and last one. Opposed to the water of the sea, the poetry of rivers. Often opposed to the dangerous and unhealthy substance of the sea, rivers conjure up an idea of fertility and purity. Whenever utopias describe an ideal nature, they abound in fresh water. The Isle of the Blessed has transparent rivers emptying softly into the sea. And it was fun looking for the appropriate photos, I can tell you. In urban environments, similarly, the freshwater element suggests a paradisal city. Rabelais introduces the reader to the delights of the Abbaye de Thelema, with a description of a fountain, right in the middle here, not really visible, whose purity is echoed by the whiteness of the alabaster stone. Often pitted against the briny water of the ocean, then fresh water is felt as a reward. When Pantagruel and his men landed on the Île Farouche, the wild island, after killing a monster, he found, quote, a fine pleasant grove, out of which flowed a delicious brook of fresh, clear, and purling water. Here they pitched their tents, unquote. As Bachelard explains, the human mind has claimed for water one of its highest values, the value of purity. How could we conceive of purity without the image of pure and limpid water, without this beautiful pleonasm that speaks to us of pure water, unquote. However, fresh and salty water can join, at times, in a happy marriage. It will be of no surprise that Thomas More, known for his ability to deny the contrary, should be the author who unites the opposite elements. In his imagination of the river Anider, which flows into the sea after flowing through Amorot, the capital of the Utopian island, Thomas More dwells on the quality of the waters. On the one hand, the river is very clear, since it rises from a small spring high 80 miles above Amorot, and the river is fresh as it runs through the city. That's why they protect it. And they have walled in the source of the river, higher up. However, like London, indeed, and probably as a metaphor for the world of common humans, the river Anider swells and exhales with the ebb and flow of the tide. I quote, "In all this stretch between the sea and the city, the river is tidal, ebbing and flowing every 6 hours with a swift current. When the tide comes in, it fills the whole Anider with salt water for about 30 miles farther, driving the fresh water back. When the tide ebbs, the river runs fresh and clean, nearly all the way to the sea again." Unquote. This image of the island of Utopia, regularly breathing in the brackish water from the surrounding sea and breathing out the pure water of its clean rivers, is congruent with the whole picture of a virtuous island, bent on improving and purifying its citizens from their faults, or citizens from somewhere else. To continue with the simile, let us suggest that if the founder of Utopia, King Utopus, was wise enough to compromise with his less enlightened neighbors, he also understood the benefit there was in using the tidal strength of the briny water, and he has placed the bridge across the river at the upper end of the city, farthest removed from the sea, so that ships can sail along the entire length of the city quays without obstruction and bring their goods, which they may not want because they are utopians. But thus, the poetic qualities of rivers tend to be entirely positive and regularly contrast with the tragic waters of sea experiences in the utopias we've been considering. One could almost say that the sea is the place of death and the river water, with its baptismal quality, the water of life. And I'll conclude. In conclusion, the water element features in good place in Utopias, probably because it is endowed with more suggestive poetic power than the other elements, being more material than air, but less so than earth, and more diverse and less final than fire. But more than anything else, it is a creator of life and death. It has engulfed the first Atlantis and given birth to a new world. It has caused Utopia to become an island and helped it remain secluded and virtuous. It is the locus of extraordinary adventures of metamorphosis in Rabelais. Since, as Bachelard declares, material imagination is sure of itself when it has recognized the ontological value of a metaphor, let us conclude that the Poetics of water have relied on that very essential quality to create dream worlds. For it seems that water is the privileged substance of utopian dreams. Thank you.